Welcome, everybody, to the TreeLines podcast. I'm Reforestation Advisor Paul Jeffries, and I am joined today with Rudy Sullivan, the Orchard Supervisor for our Bellamy Seed Orchard in Marianna, Florida. And I'm also joined today by my colleague and good friend, Audrey Phillips, who is the host of her own podcast, The Guilty and the Ghostly, and we're going to have a special Halloween edition of our TreeLines podcast today. But before we get into that, Rudy, tell us a little bit about the Bellamy Seed Orchard and how it come about, and a little bit about its production.
Well, International Paper owned the land here. They had started the original orchard in Delwood, Florida, which is about 15 miles from here. And it was a slash orchard. So it was started in the mid 60s or so. And then it migrated over here. We bought the land from Southwest International, and International Paper bought the land, started putting a slash orchard over here to begin with, about a 20-acre slash orchard. This was in the mid 70s, and then eventually started a seed extraction process building and expanded the orchards quite a bit out here, and started putting first gen loblolly and second gen loblolly orchards out here. That was in the late 70s, early 80s when all the seed extraction buildings were built. Now in 2007, International Paper sold all their forest resources and we became ArborGen. We've been ArborGen ever since. So we produce our MCP seed here, quite a bit of that, over 1.5 million plantable seedlings come from this place here. So Bellamy Seed Orchard has a rich history. It goes back way back.
That's interesting because, I mean, a lot of people don't realize, but our roots go all the way back to International Paper and the beginning of the tree improvement process that started back in the 1950s with my academic grandfather, Bruce Zobel, at NC State. And so about how many acres do we have there in the Bellamy Seed Orchard?
Here we have probably, including the swamp areas, I guess probably total about 600 acres. Delwood's probably about 180 acres, along with about 80 acres of clone bank over at Bump Nose Road.
Well, that's interesting, Rudy. So we have brought Audrey on, who is, like I mentioned earlier, the host of her own podcast, The Guilty and the Ghostly. And we thought we would just get together today and do a special little treat, just a fun episode between ArborGen, because we have a site that is actually there on the Bellamy Seed Orchard that is, at this time of year, is a very hot spot for people that like to come and see. It has a little bit of history, or a lot of history there on the site, but people like to come and see it this time of year because it's rumored to be a hot spot for supernatural activity. Let's just call it what it is. It sounds like it's supposed to be haunted. So I'm going to now turn to my good friend Audrey Phillips with The Guilty and the Ghostly, and she has done a lot of research on this. Rudy, you know a lot about the history. I'm just going to kind of let y'all take the discussion now. I'm going to listen because I'm really interested in it. I've watched a couple of videos about it, but I'm going to let y'all talk about it now. So Rudy, if you'd kind of give her the history that you gave me while I was there a couple of months ago, and y'all take it away.
I guess what I'll start off with, the Bellamy Bridge, old iron trestle bridge built in the early 1800s. This was a road through here that went to Waddell Mill to the west of us right here, and it was a farm road, and the farmers would take their goods, they'd gin the cotton over there at the mill, and they buy, sell, and trade over there. So it was a main thoroughfare through here, as well as an old Spanish trail at one time.
I did see when I was researching, before they built the bridge that stands today, they just built a wooden bridge, and it was so used it only lasted like 2 or 3 years before they had to redo it again.
That's right.
Rudy, while we were there, aren't some of those pilings still there underneath the metal bridge?
Yes, they're still there. So this area has a rich history. It goes back to the 1600s when the Spanish owned Florida. Originally it was an Indian trail, and Spanish used it as well for trading. And I guess in the early 1800s they built the bridge. It's an iron trestle bridge. It was wood across the floor. So the story goes, Samuel C. Bellamy, Dr. Samuel C. Bellamy, married Elizabeth Jane Croom, who were both from North Carolina. They moved down here to grow cotton and work with his brother. Elizabeth Jane Croom Her brother was Hardy Croom, who was a famous botanist who discovered the Torreya tree over just east of us in Apalachicola. So the story goes, on their wedding night, her dress caught fire. She ran down to the bridge and jumped off the bridge and died. So you can still see her today roaming the swamps up here in around the bridge. So I guess to make it more clear that the bridge is on the northwest corner of property of the Bellamy Seed Orchards. We see it all the time and take people down. You know, we were down there the other day, Paul, you know. So that's the story.
And Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's more to the story. That was always the rumor, and I think that was at one time that was kind of what made it embellish the story a little bit. But I think in all actuality, in doing research, Audrey, isn't there something else to the story about her death?
There is. So what I found was, like you said, they originally lived in North Carolina. The land was being overcropped. They weren't producing like they needed to. So it was the Bellamy and the Croom family both moved to Florida, basically together. They all kind of followed each other down there. The rumor, like you said, is that her dress caught on fire on their wedding night, and she suffered some severe burns. She didn't pass away immediately. The story goes that she lasted a few days, agonizing pain before she actually passed away. But as I dug a little deeper, they got married before they moved to Bellamy. They actually got married in North Carolina before they moved down here. They did move down here, and from what I could find, where Bellamy Bridge is, it's actually not Elizabeth and Samuel's property. That was actually her sister and brother's property. Elizabeth and Samuel had bought a property about 3 miles north of Marianna, I think it said. She did die tragically. It's still a tragic story. Although she didn't die on her wedding night, malaria was really bad then, and she had contracted malaria, suffered for a while, headache, fever, nausea, before she finally passed. And then 7 days later, they had an 18-month-old son who passed away just 7 days after Elizabeth. And then they believe she was in the care of her sister and Edward on the Bellamy property, which is why she was buried there. Once they passed, Samuel fell in kind of a deep depression, alcoholism, and he ended up taking his own life 16 years later. His final wish was to be buried with Elizabeth and his son, but because he took his own life, the church viewed that as a sin and would not bury him with her. And he was then buried in an unmarked grave. It's believed to be in Chattahoochee, Florida.
I had not heard that about him not being buried with them. I'd heard that he did take his own life because of depression. Because of the death, he fell into the grips of alcoholism and ended up taking his own life. So the rumor also goes on to say that now there are ghost hunters that come out to the Bellamy Bridge, and some have seen apparitions, some have felt temperature changes and such as that. I think the rumor was that back when they were touting the story about her dress catching on fire and her running to the creek and jumping in, you would see that. Have you, Rudy, ever experienced anything while you've been visiting the bridge?
No, I have not. I've heard stories from various people that I know around town. Next to the bridge was an old boat landing. It was a common place for people to gather and party, especially back in the 70s. There's been all kinds of stories that come out of there. So my sister, they were out here. My brother-in-law used to work here. He used to work when it was International Paper a long time ago. They weren't married at the time, but they'd come out here at night, and they were parking. And there's a pile of folks down at the boat landing. They actually heard a loud scream. Shortly thereafter, the birds started going crazy, and then they saw cars hauling tail away from the boat landing. It was a blood-curdling scream, my sister said.
They didn't want to stick around and find out.
But I'm like Audrey, they were not going to hang around and get to the source of the
No.
problem.
No. As for me, I have not actually seen anything. I've been out here many times at midnight working on the kiln when we're doing the seed extraction and stuff. The kiln would go out and I have to come up here. It's been pretty, spooky. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you get out there and lock the gate. Get these eerie feelings sometimes. Let's see, there's a couple others that have seen her going across the bridge, and then there's some that seen odd lights. I've heard of people talking about orbs, I guess you would say, or whatever, floating around out there.
Well, it would definitely be hard for her to walk across it if she was not an apparition because there's no flooring to the bridge, which you showed me. So
That's right.
that would definitely take a special case. What are your thoughts, Audrey?
I think it's really interesting. And then while I was doing research, I kept on going back to how did this story become what it is today, with historical proof and everything. And so I dug a little bit deeper into that. And it didn't really start with widespread attention until the 1940s. And it's believed there was a mix-up from, her name was Caroline Lee Hens, and she had wrote a book, and it was real events that happened in Jackson County, Georgia, which is where she lived at the time. One of the tales was there was a young enslaved woman named Cora, and she was held in high regard by her Mistress Bellamy. Cora was getting married, and she allowed her to get married in what they called the big house. And just like the story of the lady from the Bellamy Bridge, on her wedding day, was really tired and went to go rest for a minute, and her dress caught on fire, and she died a few days later after that. And then to add to the confusion, not just having Bellamy as the mistress, that author actually moved to Marianna, Florida in 1852 until she died in 1856. And so I guess just with local legend and passing it person to person, it's turned into what it is today for the story.
So there was just some similarities in names and then locations that caused the two stories to bleed together, I guess. Well, that's really interesting, guys, and thank you both for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Audrey?
This was a fun story that I hadn't heard before, so it was fun diving in and seeing what it was about.
Well, I know when I was there with Rudy for the tour last month, and he told me the history of it, and then we drove down and I was able to see the bridge. Just had this idea that, hey, this would make a great story because I like history and I like working for ArborGen. Being a reforestation advisor, I get to see a lot of properties and a lot of beautiful properties that private landowners obviously are very proud of, and that's one of the perks of my job, of being able to do that. And, going out and looking at this site there, Rudy, the water there flowing under the bridge while we were there is just as clear as it can be. And, we were standing there and saw a couple of big largemouth bass swimming, upstream. I'm not so sure, about the lore of the ghost or the haunting of the bridge, but I can tell you one thing from being there. Is a very peaceful location. I can understand why somebody would be attracted to that location, just to get away and listen to the leaves and listen to the wind blow through the leaves and everything, and maybe wet a hook every now and again. It is an absolute gem of a location. I'm sure that's why the Bellamy's back when they did settle that area. I'm sure that's why they found it to be such a rich location, full of promise and opportunity for them to build their family and their legacy there. It's sad that it had to end the way it did, but for everybody that's listening, on behalf of ArborGen, we would like to wish you all a very happy and safe Halloween. And Audrey, would you like to say something from the Guilty and the Ghostly?
If you need some spooky thrills or any true crime and paranormal stories, you can find us at The Guilty and Ghostly on all major streaming platforms and social media. And maybe we'll have to come out to Bellamy, and Rudy can give us a tour of the place.
Absolutely. Come anytime.
So with all of that being said, thank you all for joining us today on the Halloween edition of the TreeLines podcast. And on behalf of ArborGen, we hope you all have a very happy, safe, and spooky Halloween.